please help me welcome my friend Imam Abdullah Antepli.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace and blessings be upon you all. It is a distinct honor and pleasure, and I'm grateful to Mosaic Foundation's leadership, my good friend Ismail, for this wonderful opportunity. And also for your event on Monday about Afghanistan. I think it is only timely that we lift the people of Afghanistan and people who are suffering because of what's going on there in the hands of barbarians and savages. As we dive into this incredible scholarship, let's also keep them and lift them up in our thoughts and prayers, in action, hopefully. I know Mosaic Foundation has been involved in various refugee programs, and so I hope some of the recent arrivals from Afghanistan will be under your good care in Denver, Colorado. And the climate in Denver or Colorado is very similar to Afghanistan. 2 months summer, 9 months, 10 months winter. So they will be feeling just at home. Now I am honored and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our scholar, our teacher for today. Jordan Denari Duffner is an accomplished author and scholar of Christian-Muslim relations, interreligious dialogue, and Islamophobia. Her books are Finding Jesus Among Muslims, which I highly recommend, How Loving Islam Makes Me a Better Catholic, and Islamophobia, What Christians Should Know and Do About Anti-Muslim Discrimination. She's only a PhD student at Georgetown University, but already accomplished prolific writer, scholar, theologian, and peacemaker and bridge builder. For those who are not familiar, anti-Muslim bigotry, hate, and Islamophobia is not new in the United States, but as you all know, after 9/11, the large-scale hate, bigotry, exclusion, and unwelcome has increased in large numbers. When Americans were asked in early 2002, a few months after the heinous, treacherous terrorist attacks of 9/11, is Islam okay? Is Islam as a religion kosher and American Muslims are equal American citizens? People who said no to that question, I have some sort of discomfort or bias against Islam and Muslims. In early 2002, it was about 21%. As of December of last year, the poll showed that about 57% of Americans say no to that question. So in 20 years, large segments of American society moved from, I don't know, I'm confused, I don't know much about this religion and its people, to I have some sort of bias and negative feelings about this religion and its citizens, American citizens who happen to be from that religion. And we have an amazing scholar who is fighting this very current and rising problem, not only out of her own good heart, not out of just being nice, but by engaging with her own Christian Catholic roots, activating religious resources by being a brilliant theologian and pushing back and trying to heal America and American people from this current contemporary disease and cancer that we all are fighting for. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Imam Abdullah and Ismail for having me. It's a real joy to be with all of you and to everyone on the call this evening. So thank you.
It is absolutely a pleasure. I want the audience and myself to get to know you a little bit more. Why don't you tell us, a good Catholic girl with an Arabic sounding middle name, how did you end up in this topic of Islamophobia, Christian-Muslim relations? What was that journey? Clearly, this is more than a job. Clearly, this is your calling. But give us a window into that rich arrival to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm a Midwestern girl by origin. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, going to Catholic school from first grade through high school. And, you know, I knew people of other faiths. I had family members who were Protestant, but by and large, I was in a predominantly Catholic community. But I was always curious about religious diversity and people who didn't believe like we did, people who didn't practice their religion the way that we did. I went to a Jesuit high school in Indianapolis where I had the opportunity to take a world religions class, to meet Jewish students, to meet Muslim students, to meet Hindu students. One of the really wonderful things for those who don't know about many Jesuit schools, and particularly the one I attended, is that they are not only often fairly religiously diverse for a Catholic school, but they also, I think, prioritize more than other Catholic institutions the teaching of other religions, so that students are not only religiously literate, but also, I think, can learn to appreciate the way that that God is working in other people's lives, beyond our own community. At the same time that I was first exposed to other religions, that was when 9/11 happened. That was when there was the start of this rise of what we now call Islamophobia. I was in 5th grade when 9/11 happened, so I was pretty young. I'm still, quite young, in those, relative terms, I guess. But I grew up during the War on Terror, during the politicization of Islamophobia. So, Republican politics was a space where anti-Muslim scapegoating became very normal, and I saw how that started to seep into my own Catholic community. I tell a story in my recent book, Islamophobia, about an anti-Muslim hate email that was circulated through my Catholic parish community. And all of these families who we knew and who we respected were sending around this message that equated ordinary Muslims with the terrorists that we would hear about on TV, with the Taliban or with Al Qaeda or whoever, and basically casting suspicion on the entire Muslim community and effectively justifying any kind of discrimination that might happen to them. And that was really distressing to me, because it not only, this email message was not only saying something about Muslims that was wrong, but it was also saying something about who we were as Christians and as Catholics, that we felt like it was somehow consonant with our identity as Christian people to be bigoted towards or to scapegoat another religious community. So, my discomfort with receiving that chain email message has, in a lot of ways, propelled this career and this trajectory. And another part of it too is, particularly in college, having the wonderful experience of getting to know Muslims and dialoguing with them as friends, of studying abroad in the Middle East. I then did a Fulbright in the Middle East, in the country of Jordan. So, Jordan was in Jordan, which was always, a fun introduction. It's fun to meet new people. So yeah, for me, my journey has been guided by, the recognition of this problem of Islamophobia, and the recognition that my community has a ways to go, just like all communities do, of living up to the values that we say that we believe in. And then also this really positive experience of getting to know Muslims, getting to know about their religion, and finding that my own Catholicism wasn't threatened by that, but actually was enlivened and enriched and renewed because of that engagement with another religious tradition.
That's exactly what I want to ask you next, because your first book's title, "If You Found Jesus," in your journey to Islam, which is the definition of a successful interfaith dialogue or cross-cultural, cross-civilizational engagement of any kind. The real home run is not only you just cross the border and get to know another different faith tradition, but that attempt to learn other becomes a mirror to you. That simultaneously, as you develop knowledge, appreciation, and respect, you find out more about your own faith tradition, and it becomes a better believer, better committed practitioner in your own faith tradition. It seems you delivered incredible home runs on that front. Tell us how engaging Muslims made you a better follower and disciple of Christ.
Yeah, well, I'll preface that by saying, I don't know how successful a disciple of Christ I am. It's always something that we're trying to become better at, and as Christians and Muslims and so many people would say, we're all sinners, and we're all trying to do better, and realize that it's only by the mercy of God can we succeed at all. But Yeah, so, there's a few things that, that have been really impactful to me in these friendships I've had with Muslims and this experience of interreligious dialogue. One thing that was powerful for me early on, particularly in college, of my friendships with Muslims, was seeing what their prayer life was like and seeing how their lives were made better by, in many cases, praying 5 times a day. And I wanted to have a more robust prayer life myself. And I found that, that seeing that in my Muslim friends made me want to engage the resources that I had in Catholicism more. So I went to a Jesuit college. I went to Georgetown, which is where I'm now doing my PhD, many years later. But they have, the Jesuit tradition also has these beautiful traditions of daily prayer and incorporating this, or I guess inculcating this, what they call contemplation and action, this idea that we can be constantly aware of God, even while living in the world, which I think is also very, is something that a lot of Muslims would relate to as well. That we don't have to always remove ourselves from the world in order to have a regular prayer life or have this, kind of constant connection with God. And one of the other things that has been so impactful, not just when I was an undergrad, but also throughout my, my career since then and in my graduate work, is learning about the differences theologically between Christianity and Islam have been challenging in a really good way. Because you find that there are similarities in places where you didn't expect there to be similarities. And then where there are differences, you ask, okay, well, how important are these? What do these mean? What implications do these have? And I find, oftentimes the theological conversations that I have with Muslims and the challenges that I will get from friends, like, always offered, very kindly, it makes me think, it makes me grapple with what I believe. And one of the things too that's really kind of fun about it is, you'll find an interpretation that might be more dominant in Muslim theology or in Muslim thought, and then realizing that, oh yeah, we kind of have that there too, but it's in Christianity, but it's been suppressed a little bit more. Like, for example, I have always really loved Muslim reflection on theological anthropology, or, what does it mean that we are made in the image of God, but also sinners? And Muslims, will reject this idea of original sin by and large. And I've always found that really appealing. And then to then be kind of prompted back by that into the Christian tradition to learn about people and theologians who might have actually had maybe a more Islamic view, but still within the Christian tradition. So that's kind of a specific and like nerdy example, but
no, it's a good
one of the ways, yeah.
No, it's incredible, and I really applaud you emphasizing in this cross-faith conversation. One of the ways in which you can achieve success is not limiting your imagination to similarities, what we share in common. What we share in common is fine, but ultimately what makes us who we are is not our similarities, our differences. And real learning really happens when that engagement is rich enough to engage with those differences, and sometimes contradictory ones. I made similar journey to Christianity. There is very little room where Christian Trinitarian theology of God could be reconciled with Islam. This is an irreconcilable difference. There's a major disconnect and departure. But I learned so much how that difference informed the way in which I can imagine God a little bit in a richer and a different kind of language. But your fascination with Muslim prayer is a term Christopher Stendhal many years ago from Harvard, holy envy.
Yeah.
That you witness something in other faith tradition, you sort of have some part of it, but that articulation is so beautiful, so rich, so fresh, just not in the books, somebody's life 5 times a day. And I have long list of holy envies about Christianity as well. As we journey into other faith tradition, I think one of the measure of success is how many holy envies we are able to develop. I am sorry to shift the conversation from a wonderful, delightful theological conversation into Islamophobia, but we have to do that. I was
Yeah.
so moved when you said you heard anti-Muslim bigotry, but it hurt you more when it was said and done in the name of Christianity. There is a Jewish term, theological term, Chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name, using God's name, religiosity, text, and scripture in promoting, empowering hate. That Catholic ouch is so noble and praiseworthy. And that's exactly what you're doing with this second book. Not only just say, let's get along and let's love Islam and Muslims, but you are trying to activate sources within your own Catholic tradition. Tell us a little bit about this book. How did you conceive? Why do you go beyond just niceties and trying to engage with parts of your tradition to build tools and equipments for people to understand and welcome Muslim neighbors?
I wrote the book because I thought it was needed. I mean, I think there are so many wonderful books out there about Islamophobia that can educate readers about the prejudice and the discrimination that Muslims face in the US and elsewhere, and the roots and the history of all of that. But as you said, I really felt like it was important to speak directly to Christians and to be able to speak their language and the language, you know, and out of my own language, which I share with them. And also to be able to address head on some of the hesitancies that people in my community have, and to say, you know, I understand why you might hold the views about Muslims that you do, or you might feel the way you do, because, and you know, empathizing with that in the sense of saying, you know, I'm not going to condemn you for this, but I understand where it comes from. And, you know, no one sets out to be a bigot. I mean, very few people do. And that was the thing that became so clear to me when I received that chain email all those years ago. The woman who forwarded that to us was a kind, wonderful, generous woman. She was just misguided and ignorant, and had unfortunately been on the receiving end of very concerted efforts to misinform the public.
If I may,
and so,
if I may quickly interrupt, you're absolutely right. If you look at that 57% of Americans who have negative views of Islam and Muslims, when you ask them other questions, whether they believe in religious liberty, whether they believe in mercy, compassion, civil liberties, they all 99% say yes. They are not categorically racist people, but when it comes to Islam, they have some specific issues and problems.
Yeah, and so I felt it was important also to not simply make the book an Islam 101 book. I mean, that's the approach that a lot of anti-Islamophobia efforts take. And I myself am teaching an Islam 101 class at Georgetown in the fall. I start next week. So I think there is an important place for educating the public about Islam and letting your average American know what the vast majority of Muslims believe about their faith and about God and those sorts of things. But I felt like it was important to pull the curtain back on what Muslims have experienced in terms of Islamophobia, the roots and the causes of that, whether they be political, related to you know, U.S. imperialism and wars abroad, related to government surveillance, all of these sorts of things, the Islamophobia industry, which, you know, we could talk about more if we wanted to. And then I also wanted to focus specifically on manifestations of Islamophobia in Christian communities, because, and especially in Catholic communities, not because I think Catholics are uniquely Islamophobic. There's a lot of Islamophobia in Protestant and evangelical communities, Orthodox communities, Jewish, Hindu. I mean, everyone has problems with each other, you know, but not many people had written about Catholic Islamophobia before. And I had done quite a bit of research on that subject when I was working full-time at the Bridge Initiative at Georgetown, which is a project that studies Islamophobia. And so, you know, I kind of lay out the problem in the book. And then at the end, you know, to go back to your question, I say, okay, but does it have to be this way? I don't think our Catholic and our Christian faith tradition makes us automatically Islamophobic. On the contrary, I think if we draw on the sources of our faith and we live out what we say we already believe, we actually have a calling and a mandate to combat prejudice and discrimination towards Muslims in, in a range of ways, whether it be large scale or, very small things we can do in our community.
Can you give us a few examples from the book without providing too many spoilers? Because everybody here will buy the book, read the book. But can you give us a few examples? How did you make that Catholic Jesuit move? And what part of the tradition you reconnected with?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do in that section of the book is I draw on what's called Catholic social teaching and apply it to Islamophobia. So Catholic social teaching is a bunch of teachings and documents that have been issued by the Catholic Church, popes, bishops, the leadership over the last, I think it's like 150 years, that speak basically to the way that Christian faith informs how we should live in public, how our faith impacts the way we interact with other people in the world. And scholars have identified a bunch of principles that undergird all of this large body of Catholic social teaching. Sometimes the way I like to think of it is like Catholic social teaching is the maqasid, like to use an Islamic, Arabic term, the maqasid of the like broader Catholic social teaching Sharia, which basically this idea that, we can look at all this teaching that we have and say, okay, but what is it all about if we really simplify it? And so Catholic social teaching is concerned about human dignity and protecting life and honoring the image of God that every single person is born with and retains throughout their entire life. And one of those things that's included in that is religious freedom and protections. Things like the common good. So not just focusing on our own individual needs, but thinking about how our rights and duties relate to other people. And then there's several other principles, but the two that I'll mention here are solidarity and subsidiarity. Solidarity being this recognition that we should help other people based on this notion that we are all equals and that we should, join arm in arm and help one another, oftentimes through kind of larger social programs, whether they be government programs or other sorts of things. The principle of subsidiarity also encourages us to think about, well, how can we focus on the local level? How can we solve the problems that exist at the lowest level possible? So if there's a problem in our local community, can we solve it at our local community level before going up to the state level or those sorts of things? So these principles have been applied to all sorts of other issues that Catholics face. Anti-Black racism, environmental issues, immigration, war and peace, all these sorts of things. And no one had applied it to Islamophobia yet. Oftentimes, interreligious relations or combating bigotry is relegated to like the interreligious dialogue realms of Catholic activity. And I am trying to say, no, this is also a social justice issue, a religious freedom issue, something that we need to engage with beyond just, let's sit across a table and, and talk about our faith, as much as I love doing that,
It's fascinating. I can't wait to completely read the book. I started out after I received the invitation only a few days ago. This is my last question to Jordan. I welcome any other from the audience right after this question. Islamophobia always puzzles me and confuses me and frustrates me. But the Catholic and the Jewish Islamophobia frustrates me the most. Because if you look at the Catholic and the Jewish communities, immigration patterns to the United States, and the kind of struggles that they have gone through in order to carve out a respectful space in American society for Catholicism, Catholic Church, Catholic teachings. If you just go to those anti-papist newspapers, take out the Catholic and then put Islam or Muslims, it's just the same, as if we learn nothing from the history. Not only you do wonderfully, like activating theology, but what about the role of history? How come hurt people of yesterday hurting today? How come the grandchildren of people who went through the same, what's the respectful way of saying crap, and now turning on and and discriminating people in the way their ancestors have been discriminated. Can you unpack a little bit of the role of history, that lack of empathy, that failure to learn from our previous experience?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly that there's an ignorance about among Catholics and Jews and others about our history. I mean, I grew up not knowing the extent to which my Italian Catholic ancestors were discriminated against when they came to this country, 3 generations ago. And I think if maybe other Catholics were gifted, I guess, with that history or that knowledge from their families, maybe they would have viewed all of these things differently. But I also think it's when communities like ours or like mine tried to assimilate, there's almost an active leaving behind of that history that we experienced. And I wonder if that plays a role, not to blame blame one's ancestors. I mean, there's reasons why people tried to leave behind aspects of their identity that were causing them harm at the time. But one of the things that I, as try to do in the book is to draw attention to exactly what you point out, that the same stereotypes that people leveled against Catholics and Jews and others are the same things that people say about Muslims today. And when I read the things that people used to claim about Catholics, I chuckle to myself. I'm like, this is absolutely ridiculous. And maybe there are some segments of the population that still believe this, but by and large, like most people would find this absurd. And so the fact that people still buy it about Islam and Muslims is just so unfortunate. And it just kind of is evidence of this cycle that we have in the US of scapegoating the most recent immigrant group with the same smears that we've always used against people. Another thing, to go to your point that I also try to draw attention to with regard to history is the unfortunate ways that Christians have engaged with Muslims, for centuries. And I look at some of the examples from Europe and also in the United States. But I talk about the Crusades. I talk about the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Spain by Catholic powers, things like that. Not because Catholics are uniquely bad in this regard. I mean, all of our religious communities have ugly things in our past that we shouldn't have done, and we need to reckon with now and and kind of be reconciled for. But I do it because I didn't grow up learning these things, and I think a lot of people in my community didn't. And so we have these rose-colored glasses on when we look at our own community. But somehow we know the worst things that Muslims have done to us. So we learn the horrible things from history that Muslims have done to us, but we have no idea that we've in many cases done the same things to Muslims. And so what I try to do is to just help my community to take those glasses off and be a little bit more realistic about who we are, and also more realistic about who Muslims are. And I hope that's at least one piece of the puzzle for moving forward.
Thank you. We talked about measures of success in interfaith dialogue, interfaith engagement, but measures of failure is exactly what you point out. The worst interfaith accidents is you just compare the best of yourself and with the worst of other people. How many times I walked into a church and somebody says, Christianity is a religion of love. Your religion is a religion of bloodshed. God of Christianity is all forgiving, and Allah is a fire-breathing dragon. It only reflects the ignorance, your own faith tradition. Even as an imam, I know enough of Bible, on Quran and Christian history that's just not true. So thank you for pointing out that. Let me see. I don't see anybody in the audience. Laurie, please unmute yourself. You are still muted.
There. Okay. I've on a real basic level, I'm a Christian, and just this last week, this is such a timely talk, because just this last week, two very dear friends of mine, actually three, who are also Christian, I received an email from one of them with a letter that they forwarded that I think is going through the email circuit right now, from a guy named Rick Mathis, who is a prison, involved in prison ministry, and his theme was "What's an Infidel?" And he was saying that Muslims require, in order to get to heaven, require murdering infidels or unbelievers of the Islamic religion. And these friends of mine circulated this. I was floored, and I actually wrote what probably, from their point of view, is a pretty nasty letter to all of them. I have not heard from any of them yet, but I think taking words out of the Quran out of context add to the problems that Christians may have with Muslims. And I pointed out to them that if you take biblical scripture out of context, you've got the very same thing, because there's scripture in the Bible that talks about if you don't believe in the God of Israel, slay all men and women and young and old, and it's in the Bible too. So I don't know that I have a question so much as I just appreciate the fact that this is such a pertinent topic, and it was really.
It's a wonderful explanation and a good question to Jordan. Jordan, how to deal with this kind of Islamophobic statement, especially distributed by people who are involved in Christian ministry? Like, what are some of the general strategies you can share with us?
Yeah, well, and before I get to the solutions, I just want to commend Lori for actually responding, because one of the things I talk about in the book is that when I first received that email all these years ago, I didn't respond because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. There was also sort of a power and like an age differential. Like, I was a young person. This woman who sent along the message was, an adult and the mother of, friends of mine. And so I didn't respond. And I talk in the book about like all of those times when people have said Islamophobic things or sent along messages like that when I haven't done something, because it's easier to just let stuff slide. But yeah, and I myself often feel very paralyzed in those situations, particularly when people say things in the course of a conversation or in passing even. It's like, to halt the conversation and to like rewind and then to figure out, okay, how am I going to respond to this, can be really daunting. And you don't want to fracture relationships that are meaningful to you. So I think there's a number of strategies that I talk about in the book, but a few things that I try to do is, one, when possible, to point out the broader trend of scapegoating, to go back to what Imam Abdullah and I were just talking about, that people have done this over and over and over again throughout American history and in other contexts too, to scapegoat, newcomers or people that are perceived as different or foreign, that sort of thing. Like, if and when you can draw on that history and draw people's attention to the fact that these exact stereotypes were deployed against our community or in other religious communities, I think that can be really effective. I also think it has to be done a little bit more delicately, but we also have to draw attention to the fact that there are active networks of misinformation that are feeding people this sort of stuff. In addition to just trying to contradict the claims that are made about Islam. The problem is, many of us, on this call are not like Islamic studies scholars. We're not going to be able to we don't know how Muslims have interpreted every passage of the Quran. We don't know about all the different ways that Muslims have lived out, their faith throughout history or their beliefs about lots of different things. So sometimes it's hard to combat Islamophobia simply by contradicting the Islamophobic claims that are made, like this whole thing about, like, you know, the quote from the Quran, like you were talking about. So I think what we can do sometimes is talk about the concerted misinformation effort by, you know, what I term in the book, the Islamophobia network or the Islamophobia industry. I mean, you have to, I think, sometimes be kind of careful about that, because when you tell people that they're misinformed or that they're getting their info from the wrong places, they can feel like the rug's being pulled out from under them and that you're just kind of accusing them of not being smart enough to recognize misinformation when they come across it. But it's not, you know, it's not their fault. I mean, there are, you know, these networks of people that make and generate a lot of money that have been doing this for a long time. One other thing I'll say is that I have learned to lower my expectations a little bit, but I actually do think that you can make progress. So one of my approaches, particularly in like one-on-one conversations, is not necessarily to change a person's mind, you know, in the course of a single conversation, but to rather call into question in a charitable way the assumptions that they might have. So if someone says, oh, well, yeah, like, I'm trying to think of an example, but like someone might make a generalization about Muslims and you'll say, oh, well, you know, in my experience, that's not how I see it. Like, why do you see it that way? Or what, kind of ask them to repeat the premise of their own question, because in doing that, people oftentimes realize that they've made an unfair generalization, that they've said something that really isn't fair. Or to just, yeah, let people know, you know, that's not the way I see it, to offer some counter information and to not push people into a defensive stance, because then people close off and they're not going to listen anymore. I find that if I can hopefully leave people at least with more questions than they had before, you know, and I use a gardening metaphor in the book saying, you know, we don't want to like dry up the soil. We want to like keep it loose. Like we want to till it to keep it loose so that people can leave that conversation and maybe that seed that we planted in that conversation will grows up, but long after we've exited the conversation. Like people oftentimes like change their mind when they're feeling secure and when they feel like they've made an authentic journey, not when they're being told to change their mind.
Wonderful, thank you. I really hope you were able to take notes. These were good set of intellectual as well as pedagogic and pastoral strategies. One, maybe I can add also, really not brushing people off. I would like to just emphasize what Jordan said, not just write people off immediately and create a space where this can be the start of a conversation, not end of a conversation. I cannot emphasize how helpful they are. And sometimes pointing out some of the maybe irrational aspects of these kind of questions. For example, if Muslims' religion required killing non-Muslims, we did such a horrible job in it. We failed. We didn't live our religion at all. After 1400 years of absolute political hegemony and power, 50% of Middle East is Christian, 20% of Syria is Christian, 15% of Palestinians are Christian, 20% of Egypt is Christian, 50% of Lebanon is Christian. Like, and compare the Jewish experience of Jews in Europe, Christian Europe, and the Jews in the Muslim world. That means Muslims are just lousy people. They didn't, inviting people into some sort of humorous, like it doesn't make sense. There's some common lack of common sense here is just staring at us.
I think that's great.
Lightens people up.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, getting people into a space where they're more comfortable and they're almost forced to step out of like this oppositional thing to like bring in some levity.
Yes. Yeah. And also, as you said it beautifully more than once, no resource is more effective and impactful as human beings. All the studies show over and over again, if you know one Muslim, if you ever been to Ismail's house, if you ever had the pleasure and honor to have his home cooking, I mean, you have the vaccine. There is no way virus of Islamophobia will affect you. from going forward. Keith, did I see your hands up?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on just what you were saying. I would like to ask Jordan what role interpersonal connections between people of different faiths has in your book and your recommendations and classes and things. Because from my standpoint, that's when things can really crack open. If you just are talking to people of the same faith and doing theological things or explaining things to them, there's a limited amount, I think, of what you can really do. But if you introduce somebody to one Muslim or to a Muslim community and have some intermingling and questions and answers and things, then things really begin to move.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and would echo what Imam Abdullah said, that all of the studies show that that interpersonal relationships are the most important thing that can shape our views of other, entire religious groups. As you said, to use the virus kind of metaphor, it inoculates people in a certain sense. And in my own experience, I mean, personal relationships have been so impactful and are the only reason probably why I moved in the direction that I did. The one thing that I'll say, and I include this caveat in the book, that I think it's important that we don't expect Muslims to spend all of their time just trying to get to know us so we can be less Islamophobic, because Muslims are a much smaller segment of the US population than Christians, for example. And pretty much every Muslim in America already knows a Christian and is already engaging in interreligious dialogue, every day. And there are obviously there are so many Muslims who are actively involved in interreligious activities, Ismail, Abdullah, so many of my friends and colleagues, and that's so important. I just think it's important that we don't only put the burden on the Muslim community, and that those of us who do live in Christian circles also take what we know and start talking to our communities, even maybe before some people know a Muslim. Because also the thing that I have found, unfortunately, is that people might trust me more. People in my own community might trust me more because of the way I look and the fact that I'm an insider to their community. I mean, it's unfortunate that they might take my assessment of Islam more seriously than a Muslim who walks through their doors, but sometimes that is the case. And so I don't think that should be the ending point, but it is kind of something that I keep in mind, in terms of the broader strategy of combating Islamophobia. So yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say with that is, I have some friends and colleagues who do anti-Islamophobia work who say, I wouldn't really feel comfortable going into a lot of Christian churches because I don't want to be made to answer for my entire religious community, or I don't want people to see me as less human simply because I'm Muslim. It can be kind of a dehumanizing experience. So, yeah, I don't know, Imam Abdullah, what would you say to that?
No, that's really incredibly profound, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that empathy you feel for the Muslim community. We have 9 mosques here in this area where I live. And average 50% of the annual budget goes to outreach. We have other needs and we have requirements. We are trying to make this work as American Muslims as much as we can. The fact that we are spending 50% of our budget and revenue trying our best so that our fellow Americans will not hate us, that's a huge cost to pay. And how many times people like Ismail, myself, and others in 20 minutes explain all about Islam? Now, how can you explain all about Christianity, crusade, Inquisition in 20 minutes? How is that possible? How is that you are putting me in a position which you are no way you can even conceive, come close to understand about your own faith tradition? There's a huge, and there is an incredible amount of study, the mental health and the psychological cost of Islamophobia on American Muslim community.
Yeah.
There's a recent report that American Muslims are twice as likely to attempt suicide than any other faith communities. It is because of this external pressure, constantly being questioned, constantly walking with chips on your shoulder. It is not easy, and thank you for recognizing that. One way to maybe amplify this impact of interpersonal connection is pointing out Muslim celebrities, public figures, and thank God we have so many of them. Like, even if you are not in a position to interact one-on-one, you can follow people like Wajahat Ali, Rabia Chowdhury, Hassan Minhaj, Ali Welshi, sports people. Half of the hip hop artists are Muslim. Like, there is a way in which in this modern time, you can connect the Muslims without necessarily imposing too much on people individually, or use the language of music and art, diversifying your source of information, but also your consumption of art. Why don't you include some South Asian music, Middle Eastern cuisine, etc.? There's a way in which we can use the tools of a civilization or art and culture and cuisine into this. We can discuss this and more for hours, but Jose has the last question. I'm going to recognize him. And then Jordan, in addition to his answer, I appreciate if you can share with us your ending, concluding wisdom and thoughts. Jose, go ahead.
So I have a comment. I agree that relationships are primary. I agree that it's all about relationships. But the other thing that has helped me also is to pray with other people. I have found out that I cannot be angry at someone with whom I have prayed. So as a Catholic, I've gone to many evangelical and Pentecostal services, and that has changed my attitude about evangelical Christianity. And I regularly go to our mosque. I go to both Eids, I participate in prayer, and I have just found out that when I pray with another person, I cannot be angry with that person. And it just changes my whole attitude about them.
That's really lovely. And yeah, I myself have prayed with Muslims many times, and was toying with whether or not I would write my dissertation on interreligious prayer and that whole experience, and what it means to like cross that borderline and between religions and that sort of thing, or asking the question, where is that borderline between religions? Can we pray with each other? That sort of thing. I'm not writing my dissertation on that, but yeah, no, it's such a beautiful insight. And I'll tell just maybe in conclusion a quick story about my own experience of praying Salah with Muslims. In college, I went on a Muslim retreat my freshman year. Non-Muslims go on the retreats frequently, but that year I was the only non-Muslim on the retreat. And one of the evenings we were there, there was an extended period of Salah. I don't remember actually if it has a particular name or if it's a particular kind of prayer that we were doing, or like prayer sequence that we were doing. But what was ironic was that the Qibla, the direction of prayer towards Mecca, happened to be facing this massive cross that was in this Christian retreat center that we were in. And it didn't have it wasn't a crucifix. It didn't have Jesus on it, but it was just like a plain cross. And I have some pictures from it, and it's just very ironic to see all these Muslims facing and bowing down to this cross. They didn't care. Anyway, I joined in with the prayer, and I'm standing with my friends, shoulder to shoulder with a headscarf on, and really desperately trying to find, to feel connected to God in that moment, and knowing how much my friends were feeling that connection during that time. And many of the Muslims that I know will pray with their hands sort of on their stomach, or right under their breastbone. And I was just finding that for me, exactly, yeah. And I was finding that for me, that wasn't working. And so what I did is I folded my hands, which is the way I've grown up praying my entire life. And it was once I started doing that, then I started to feel even while I was still doing the rest of the motions, but I was folding my hands when we were standing. And that's when I started to feel more connected to God. And it was for me, like it meant a couple of things to me at the time. It was one, this recognition that like, you know, after all of this searching, I realized that I can still have I still want to actually build my faith life in my Catholic Christian tradition that I grew up with, that I was almost surprised to find that I still valued something in my home tradition, because I was kind of like disillusioned with it for so long. But it was this kind of homecoming to Catholicism that didn't make me want to shun Islam, or didn't make me like not like Islam. It was more this recognition that like we're both worshiping God in different ways, and we might even, you know, to go back to your point, Imam, like we may even affirm different things about God theologically. Like we talk about God as Trinity. Muslims definitely do not. But there's still this recognition at the end of the day, at least for me and so many of my Muslim friends, that we're orienting our lives and our prayers towards the same source, and trying to ultimately live lives that are pleasing to God, and lives where we like feel connected to God, and, you know, and to all of his creation. And so, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, prayer is really, so, you know, it's at the center, and it's even more, I think prayer is even more what God wants it to be when it has an impact on how we relate to other people. You know, to go back to Jose's point, like if our prayer doesn't impact how we're relating to other people, then why are we doing it?
Exactly. What a profound and beautiful way of ending this rich and rewarding conversation. Please join me in thanking soon Dr. Denari Duffner, and thank you, Mosaic, for this very rich and beautiful and timely conversation. I hope you will read the book. You can start buying your Christmas presents and give these books to your friends who are sending you those emails, Lori, and then others. Thank you very much. God bless you all, and may God enable us and everybody to build that immune system where we can resist bigotry, exclusion, hate of any kind, so that we can be motivated like Jordan has shown us. She just didn't only got shocked and sad and dismayed, but she charged into this beautiful journey and struggle. She's amplifying and she's exemplifying what needs to be done. Thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure. Ismail, do we have any housekeeping announcements at the end?
No, I also would like to thank Jordan and you, Imam Abdullah. This was wonderful, a very enlightening conversation. Whenever I listen to you, there is something I learned from you. Thank you a lot for being with us this evening here. I also would like to thank everyone on this call this evening. It was wonderful to see people on camera. I hope everyone is still healthy and will be healthy. So the next waves of COVID seems to be coming, unfortunately. So please stay healthy. We would love to see you again soon on August 30th. As I mentioned, we will have a conversation on what is happening in Afghanistan, which is very timely. We are following all the unfortunate events in Afghanistan. As Imam Abdullah mentioned, please pray for the people of Afghanistan. So again, if you haven't signed up, please sign up and follow us and attend our upcoming events. On November 5th, we will have a blood drive as well. So many, many thanks. It was a wonderful evening. I enjoyed seeing so many friends again. Enjoy your evening and see you soon again. Take care.
Thank you all.
Blessings. Ma'as salama. Jordan,
As-salama.
looking forward to staying in touch.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.